So everybody today is talking about Pastor Charles Stanley, his tragic death, and I wanted to ask you, when you think about his life and his legacy, what most stands out to you?
Oh, I think a couple of things really stand out to me. First, I think he really embodied the word pastor. I think when I think of Dr. Stanley, the first thing that comes to mind is pastor. He was first and foremost that. I know he did a lot of things on television and radio, but at the core of who he was a pastor. He really loved people. He cared for people. He cared for their lives, and he cared where they spent eternity.
Yeah, and his involvement was very deep with your organization, National Religious Broadcasters, for decades, for eons, working with your organization. When you think about the size and the scope of In Touch Ministries and what he was doing, I mean, how common is it for a ministry to have that big of a footprint?
Not very common, especially today in our kind of fragmented culture of distribution of television and radio. Dr. Stanley was one of those pioneers. He early on in his ministry, he looked at media and said this was a way to reach people. This was a way to reach a lot of people for the gospel. And that was his heart. He didn't go in it to be a TV personality or a radio personality. He really looked at it as an extension of his ministry there at the church in Atlanta. And I think that's what made him such a pioneer. He expanded his ministry constantly over television, radio, and then, later he was one of the first pioneers into the whole digital space, all about reaching people for the gospel.
Well, and there are a couple of things I want to talk about there that I think are important. The first is that he lived by Acts 20:24, and I'm going to read it because I have it in front of me here. Life is worth nothing unless I use it for doing the work assigned by me, by the Lord Jesus Christ, the work of telling others the good news about God's mighty kindness and love. And what you're speaking about, he lived that out in so many different ways and in so many different iterations, because NRB over the years, your organization awarded him. He was given the Chairman's Award. His organization was also winning awards just a couple of years ago for digital efforts, right? So he seemed to always be innovating. Would that be accurate?
Oh, I think that's very accurate. I think his ministry was constantly innovating. I think they had a real sense of how media was changing and media landscapes were changing, and they really advanced that. I remember one of my earliest meetings at NRB. This was 20 years ago, and we used to have these roundtable meetings, and Dr. Stanley's team showed up, and they were the folks leading and talking about this digital revolution. And so, yeah, he won so many awards. He was, as you said, the Chairman's Award. He's in the NRB Hall of Fame as broadcasters, and his programs won so many industry awards.
Well, and I want to get back to that but for a moment, let's talk about NRB. For those who don't know, you have an incredible organization of Christian communicators. What do you guys do? Give us a little bit of background so people can understand why that is so significant.
Yeah, NRB is an association of Christian communicators. So folks that are in television and radio and new media today, digital, podcasting, bloggers. We work a lot with Christian films and even Christian publishers. And NRB kind of has a twofold mission. One, we protect access to the distribution avenues today for the gospel. So whatever your ministry or ministries are called to do, if they're using media to do it, our job is to work hard so they have access to those different mediums to be able to do the ministry God's called them to do. And then the second thing we do is we help ministries come together in partnership. That whole idea of the Bible, iron sharpens iron, as I was talking about in these innovation exchanges where ministries get together and talk about, what's working, what's not working. And they also fellowship and pray for one another. So NRB really holds that kind of a vital role in the Christian communicators community.
And I have been a part of NRB for a while now and have really found it to be an incredible way for communicators to come together. And when you look at somebody like Charles Stanley, that longstanding involvement in NRB shows how important the organization is. And so people understand the significance. You mentioned the Chairman's Award. He's also in the Hall of Fame. Talk about those two awards. Why are those notable and why was he chosen for those?
Well, the Hall of Fame award is given to Christian communicators in broadcasting who have showed excellence in broadcasting over their entire ministry career. And when you look at Dr. Stanley, again, this was a man in the early 1970s who saw the importance of reaching people through this new medium of television, continuing to reach people through radio, and then his digital innovations come in the early 2000s. And the Chairman's Award really goes to, again, a communicator, somebody within the industry that also helps other ministries get involved in Christian communications and Christian mediums. He also won the Billy Graham Award for Excellence in Communications. I constantly hear from folks, and I heard through my career, my in-laws have watched Dr. Stanley for probably well over 25 years. He is one of the clearest communicators on the Bible teaching that he's really shepherded so many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people through each day.
Final question here, because his life has truly been incredible. When you look at his life and you look at his more than 6 decades in ministry, what can it teach us about the importance of living the truth out, living the gospel out, and keeping ourselves focused on God?
Oh yeah, and his ministry wasn't without its own tribulations and issues and things like that. And I think what he's really taught people and taught, especially young pastors, many pastors have been mentored by him. He really taught perseverance. To continue the good fight, to keep moving forward. It's not about us; it's about God. It's about, as you read in Acts, it's about what we do every day to bring the glory of God. I can just imagine last evening in heaven when those words were just uttered to him, "Welcome, thou good and faithful servant." And I think that's what we all want to hear. And he was such an inspiration for that.
Well, what a powerful place for us to close. Troy Miller, appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.